Contra is a certified classic, or Gryzor. A Probotector? The year is 2633, and Bill Reiser and Lance Bean invade the Galuga archipelago near New Zealand to take on the Red Faction. But since none of that is actually spelled out in the game, the manual just sort of made some stuff up. The manual moves the story to the Amazon and renames its characters Mad Dog and Scorpion, and it sets the game in modern times, which caused a real problem when Contra 3 came out, which is supposed to be set in the future, so they made the characters in those games the descendants of the ones in this one. Also, in the arcade, the two characters had a unique look, but because of the graphical limitations of the NES, they made them both just generic shirtless white guys with different colored pants. Which isn't the only thing the Nintendo version changed from the original because of the graphical limitations. The arcade had bigger sprites, detailed backgrounds, smoother animations. The Nintendo version also cut one of the pseudo 3D levels, and the side-scrolling sections obviously work a lot better. The pseudo 3D ones can weigh a little hard on the hard drive, but they still work. Actually, what Konami was able to pull off putting this game on the NES was actually pretty impressive. The game runs pretty fast for the most part, the co-op is good, and the core experience still holds up despite the cuts. Despite the constraints, they made one of the best run-and-gun games on the platform. And like most other games on the platform, Contra is hard. One shot kills you and you only get 3 lives. You get infinite continues, but it puts you back at the beginning of the level, so you lose progress. And the levels are what you would expect from an 80s run and gun. There's jungles and factories and alien spaceship level. That's completely out of place, but seems to be really common in games like that. Back when I did my video on the Ditto mod for Streets of Rage 2, that game also had a weird alien level for some reason. But each level is unique from the last, so things don't get boring and it's always kind of interesting. The levels are usually split up with a side-scrolling level and then a pseudo 3D level where you're in the foreground and there are targets in the background. And honestly, I got through most of these by just going prone and spamming fire and then just popping up if I needed to hit a target. The enemies infinitely spawn, and that's where most of the difficulty in this game comes from. Infinitely spawning enemies with various targets on the screen and a trial and error gameplay based on having to remember patterns. And the best way to get through it is to get the spread shot. Throughout the game, you can find power-ups that'll give you different weapons like a laser, a looping shot. I don't know what it's called. It starts with an F apparently. But the only one you really need is the spread shot, or maybe the shotgun. When I was a kid, I called it a spread shot just because it spreads out your shot and the power-up has an S on it. I don't actually know if that's what it's called, but it makes the game 10 times easier because you don't have to worry about dodging bullets. You can find one safe spot and just fire repeatedly, and you're probably going to hit your target. And I think the gameplay holds up even today. Contra is a timeless classic, unless you knew it as Gryzor, or maybe Probotector. The Contra came out during the Iran-Contra conflict, and the name carried a lot of political weight. So when the arcade game and the PC ports went to Europe, they changed the name to Gryzor. And Gryzor was a huge hit. It was one of the best-selling games of 1987, which led to a whole other problem. In August 1988, Germany's Federal Department of Media Harmful to Young Persons banned Gryzor because of its violent content, which was a problem because Nintendo was planning to port the game onto the NES, and at the time, Nintendo Europe's headquarters were in Germany. So Konami replaced all of the humans in the game with robots, and renamed the game Probotector, as in robot and protector. And then every sequel or port that got released in international territory kept the name. It wasn't until Contra Legacy of War that Nintendo slapped the name Contra back on it. But whether it was Contra, Gryzor, or Probotector, they all had one thing in common: the Konami Code. Everybody knows the Konami Code. It was the code made famous by Contra for giving you 30 lives. And if you're anything like me, you needed those 30 lives to get through this game. Contra burned that code into popular culture so much that you can still find it in Netflix and Siri and Google. But it didn't start with Contra. The Konami Code originated in Gradius. It was a developer code that gave you a bunch of ship upgrades so testers could survive long enough to see later levels for testing. And they just forgot to remove it before they shipped the game out. It wasn't actually supposed to be found, word just got out. But then when the code got included in Contra, it wasn't a secret anymore. And now a developer shortcut was a cultural artifact. Kind of like Contra itself. Contra's more than a hard game with a famous cheat code. Game with 3 names, 3 completely different identities. A manual that invented a story that was so contradictory, later games had to retcon to get around it. In a game that took a developer's forgotten shortcut and turned it into one of the most recognized input sequences in history. The gameplay still holds up today. One-hit kills, the spread shot, weird alien heart boss for some reason. And if you've never played it, you absolutely should. Though for your first time, you might want to throw in the Konami Code. Unless you want a real challenge. See you next time.